Hi, Jesus Ramirez here. I'm glad to announce that I'll be one of this year's judges for the MSI Creator Awards 2023. MSI, the world's leading PC brand, is hosting the competition, and you're free to enter no matter where you're watching from. The competition is divided into 3 categories: graphics, animation, and film. And the winner of each category will receive prizes including MSI hardware, cash prizes, and a trip to Adobe Max 2023. I have been selected to judge the graphics category. Check out the link below for all the official details. This year's topic is Imagination Makes Creators. To me, imagination is what allows creators to push boundaries and exceed expectations, and it's what turns ideas into a tangible reality. Based on this theme, I created a Photoshop tutorial you can follow along no matter your experience level, and I hope it inspires you to create your own artwork to submit to the competition. The Composite is meant to display the human creative spark. It showcases the connections created in our minds when we're creative. The color splatters represent art, while text and music notes pay tribute to the written and musical expressions of creativity. The math equations represent the beauty of science. I hope this video helps you spark some ideas. I can't wait to see what you come up with. Now let's jump right into the tutorial. This is the image we're going to start with. We have this background and this photo of a brain. And the first step is to mask out the brain from the background. There's a lot of ways of doing that in Photoshop. I always recommend starting with the quick actions here in the properties panel. All you need to do is click on the remove background button. Photoshop will use artificial intelligence to analyze the image and remove the background. In this case, it does a fantastic job. The next step is to fix the edges of the mask. So you can do so by simply double clicking on your layer mask here. That will bring you into the Select and Mask workspace where you can adjust the edges of your mask. I recommend using the black and white view so that you can see a black and white version of the mask and you can better see the edges. With the zoom tool, I'm going to zoom in and you can see that the edges are a bit jagged. To smooth them out, you can simply drag the smooth slider to the right and then you can increase the contrast to sharpen those edges. Also, I recommend shifting the edge inward a little bit. You can do so by dragging the shift edge slider to the left. When you're done, you can press OK and the edges of your mask should be much better. I think that in this case, it'll be much better if we blur the edges down here. And to do so, you can go into the blur tool and just simply blur the edges of the mask like so. And if you hold Alt and Windows Option in the Mac and click on the layer mask, you'll see the result. You can even blur it from here if you like. And you can see that with the blur tool, we're blurring the edges of that mask. Here's the pro tip. Tap the L key on the keyboard to enable the lasso tool and make a selection like so. Then go into Filter, Other, and Minimum, and you can minimize the mask. You'll keep the blur, but you'll contract the mask. And I think something like this works. And you can then double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. At this point, I think that we need to make the brain a bit larger. So I'm going to click on the layer, press Ctrl T to transform, and scale it up and move it up if need be. What I'm going to do now is create the illusion that the inner parts of the brain here are glowing. To do so, I'm going to go into the channels panel, and from here, click on RGB, then click on the red, green, and blue channel and see which one has the most contrast between the inner parts of the brain and the outer parts. And probably in this case, it's between the red channel and the green channel. I'll select the red channel in this case and I'll duplicate it by dragging the channel to the new channel icon. And then I can press Ctrl I to invert, and only the inner parts here are white. Then you can go into Image, Adjustment, and Curves, and just make everything else dark like so. And this is looking pretty good. I'll press OK, and I'll do the same thing one more time just to make those areas even darker. And I think I'll just want to make these areas here darker like so, and then press OK. Now I can load these pixels as a selection. Control click, it will load them as a selection. By the way, that's Command on the Mac, and I clicked on the duplicate channel thumbnail. Click on RGB, go back into the layers panel, and then at this point you can create a new layer and fill it with any color you want. In this case, I'm just going to select this blue and hit Alt and Backspace on Windows. That's Option Delete on the Mac to fill with that color. Then I can clip this layer to the layer below, Control Alt G, Command Option G on the Mac, and you sort of get a glowing result. This looks pretty good. And to fix some of the imperfections, you can just blur this layer. Go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and just blur it a bit so that the edges are better and they're not so jagged. Maybe blur it just a bit more, and I think this looks pretty good. If you want to adjust the color, just go into Image, Adjustment, Hue and Saturation, and adjust the hue just to get a color that you are happier with. In this case, I think this is pretty good. I can adjust the lightness maybe just a little bit. If we need to make any further adjustments, we can do that later. For now, I'll press OK. The next step is to selectively apply the glowing effects over the brain. To do so, you can hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click to create a black layer mask. This inverted layer mask will hide the contents of the layer, and we can selectively paint those in. Before we do that, I'm just gonna call this layer Blue Glow so that we remember what it is. It's always a good idea to name your layers so that you keep organized. Now you can simply select the brush tool and resize your brush by using the left and right brackets on the keyboard and paint on the layer mask with white. And I'm just gonna paint in the areas where I want that glowing effect to appear. See that? And I'm actually using a Wacom tablet right now. If you have a pressure sensitive tablet, I would recommend pressing this icon so that you can build the effect as you paint in by using pressure sensitivity. You can even reduce the opacity further and the flow as well, just to build that effect at a slower pace. And that's what I wanna do. So I'm going to undo that, maybe increase my brush size, and then just paint it in very, very lightly like so to create that effect that you see on screen. And this looks pretty good. I just don't want that glowing effect everywhere. I only want it on certain areas, and I can selectively paint that in, as I said. Then you can duplicate this layer by pressing Ctrl J on Windows, that's Command J on the Mac, clip it to the layer below, Ctrl Alt G, and change the name from Blue Glow Copy to simply Orange Glow. Then go into Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, and change the glow's color to an orange color. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can just use this color that we see on screen and fill a layer mask with black. Control and Backspace because black is our background color. Then I can paint in this red light on the inner parts of the brain here. So some parts of the brain are glowing blue, other parts are glowing red, and I think it looks fantastic. Maybe this part is where it transitions from blue to orange or red, whatever you want to use. And this is looking pretty good. Then I would recommend creating one more layer, clipping it to the layer below, and in this layer, call it White Highlight. I'll change the foreground color to white, and I'm just going to reduce my brush size and just paint with white where I want that highlight to appear. And in this case, I'm going to reduce the opacity and flow even further just because I want a much more subtle effect. There we go. I want to build the highlight like so, and I can do that here and do that here as well. And I know it's not looking perfect right now, but we're going to fix that in a moment. I just want to make it seem like certain areas of the brain are emitting more light than others. So this is sort of what these highlights are going to represent. This looks pretty good. What I'm going to do now is double click to the side of the layer here to bring up the blending options, the layer styles, I should say, but I'm going to use the blending options to make adjustments to that. The first adjustment is changing the blend mode to color dodge and unchecking transparency shapes layers to get this result. See the difference? Transparency shapes layers is enabled. When you uncheck it and use color dodge, you get that result, which is exactly what I want. And if you reduce the fill, you get a much nicer result when you want to reduce the intensity. So find an intensity that works for you and press OK. And if you have a lot of sharp edges, what you can do is simply go into Filter, Blur, and choose Gaussian Blur, and you can just blur the edges further if you want, which is what I think I'll do in this case. I just don't want it to be so center into an area. The highlights, like you see there, you see these almost perfect circles. I just want to blur it so it's more of a concentration of light, but not so strong. And I think this looks so good. And after you make that adjustment, you might want to consider readjusting the fill. Maybe you need to increase the fill or reduce it. So let's play with that. Let's increase it all the way to 100%. And that's not bad. I'll maybe keep it at about 90% or so. I think that's subtle enough. So this is before and after. Everything is looking fantastic. What I'm going to do now is go into the libraries panel, and I'm just going to bring it into our working document and place it over our image. When you're working with a layer that has black and highlights or bright areas, like in this case, you can simply choose the screen blending mode to make black invisible and keep the bright areas, which is what I want to do in this case. And now I'm going to select the move tool, and I'm going to move the layer so I can select what areas I want these highlights to appear in. So these highlights here, this is going to be a main highlight. So I'm going to press Control T, enable the reference point, move it to the highlight here, and I can now scale the layer from that point, and I can just move it so that these points match. I think it'll be cool if these points match like you see there. And I can go into my orange or red glow, whatever color that is. And with the brush tool, I can paint with white on these areas to reveal that color of light here on this part of the brain, making it seem like the brain is creating those lights. And I can do the same thing on this side as much as I can. And I think this looks pretty good. You can see what it looks like without it and with it. And one thing you might want to do is select this layer and then go into Image, Adjustment, and Curves, and then just create an S curve so that you really hide the black areas and only the brighter areas are revealed. Then select the brush tool, create a layer mask, and paint with black on any areas that show edges. Like here at the bottom, make sure to increase your opacity and flow so that those edges are not visible. You don't want any sharp edges. You just want to make it seem like everything is blending into the background. And here's a trick for you. Whenever you're working on an image, always try to build depth. It'll make things look and feel more realistic. So in this case, you can duplicate the layer by pressing Ctrl J and then transform it by pressing Ctrl T and just scale it way, way up, and maybe right click and flip it horizontally like so, and adjust it any way you want. Maybe even make it larger and move it this way. And I still think it's too small, so I'll make it even larger. Maybe right around there, give or take. You'll find a good spot, I'm sure, in your image. In this case, this is where I want it, but now I'm going to blur the layer to give it some depth. So filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I'll just increase the blur. And now it looks like this layer is closer to us just because we changed the depth of field. It's not so sharp. So it just creates the illusion that it's closer to us. And this looks pretty good. And now let's add more graphical elements. I was able to find this image as well, which is this splatter. So I can just bring in this colorful splatter from my libraries panel and just adjust it so that it fits over the brain like so. And if I drag this below here, you'll see that I can clip it to the brain. Control Alt G. And this is creating the illusion that the brain has paint splatters. And these paint splatters are supposed to represent artistic creativity. And I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply just so that it blends better with the brain. And I'll change the name to something easier to see, splatter. And here's a trick. When you're working with something like this, make sure you keep the right layer order. The paint looks like it's going over the light, and that wouldn't necessarily be the case. So we need to drag the paint splatter layer down so that now it looks more realistic. And also you can double click to the side of the layer to bring up the layer style window. And from Blend If, you can hide the paint splatter over the darker areas of the image by going into the underline layer and dragging this black point over to the right. See that? But you don't want to have a harsh transition like you see there. You want to create a smooth transition. And to do so, hold Alt and Windows, Option on the Mac, and click to split these points in half and create a smooth transition between invisible and visible areas. And do the same thing in the highlights. Watch as I drag this over to the left, the highlights are going to reveal over the plain splatter. Again, split the point in half by holding Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac and clicking, and just create this nice transition that will make the details look much more realistic. It'll make it seem like those details are over the brain. You can then press OK, and this is my result. So I'm just going to bring this over into our working document. I'm going to make it as large as the entire canvas. By the way, notice that when I dragged it, I placed it in between the clip layers. So it needs to be not clipped, and it needs to be on the top. So make sure that when you drag it up, all the layers are still clipped. And to stay even more organized, I'll select the brain, hold Shift and click on this white highlight layer on top, and press Control G to put everything into a group, and I'll call this brain. That way we stay a little bit more organized here. And now we have this handwriting layer, so I'll call it handwriting just so that we don't get confused. And there it is. What we need to do now is go into the channels panel and just make sure we can select the text. And it looks like the red channel, again, will be a good channel to duplicate. So I'll duplicate the red channel and I'll make the edges here black. So I'll select the rectangular marquee tool and fill the edges and make them black. That's black. And do the same thing here. And actually, you know what? I made a mistake. They shouldn't be black. They need to be white because I'm going to invert the mask, and the mask needs to be black, but the areas that show up need to be white. So right now when I invert, the only white areas is the text, which is exactly what I want. Then I can press Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and click and load that as a selection. Go back into RGB, then the Layers panel. I can throw away this layer because I won't need it anymore and create a new layer and fill that layer with white. Control D on Windows, Command D on the Mac to deselect, and I can call this writing. Then you can right click and convert this to a smart object to work non-destructively. Control T to transform, and you can just select perspective and drag down here, and it creates the illusion of that writing being in perspective. Then you can right click, select distort, and drag it over past the edge. Right click one more time and select warp, and now we can warp this in, making it seem like the text is really coming out of the brain, or as much as possible, like so. We just want to create the illusion of movement, of depth. Obviously, the writing is representing creative literature. So there we go. This is maybe a brain that's also really good at writing. And once you have something that looks like this, you can commit the changes, create a layer mask, and paint with black to hide the pixels over the brain, like so. Then you can change the blending mode, something like overlay, soft light, hard light, vivid light. Any one of these blending modes would work. By the way, if you select something like vivid light, I would recommend reducing the fill opacity and you'll get better results. See the difference? See that by reducing the fill opacity, that's no longer just white. Now it has yellow and blue, and it takes the color of the background, but it also creates the illusion of there being a highlight. So I recommend that you do that. And since we're using vivid light, you can double click to the side of the layer and uncheck transparency shapes layers. And this also changes the way it blends. In some cases, it might be a better blend, but in this case, it doesn't seem like it helps out too much. So I'm just gonna leave that as shown. What I'm going to do now is press Control J on Windows, Command J on the Mac to duplicate the layer. Then I'll right click and delete the layer mask. Control T to transform, and select flip horizontal, and we just make it seem like more text is coming out the other side, just to balance the image a bit better. And we'll do the same thing, create a layer mask and paint away some of that writing. What I'll do now is grab this image of music notes, and obviously this is going to represent musical creativity, and we're just going to scale this up like so. And we're going to do something very similar. We're going to go into the channels panel, and we're just going to select pretty much any channel. They're all going to be the same this time. And duplicate the channel, Control I to invert, and we just need to make sure that the musical notes are completely white and everything else is black. I'm not going to want that white circle in the background there, so I'm just going to make it black for now. And then I'm going to go into Image, adjustment curves, and I'll just drag down like so, just so that we have the music notes. I'll press OK. And then with the burn tool, I'm just going to make sure that range is set to shadows so that I only affect the shadows. And I'm just going to paint with that tool here on top to make sure that these areas are black, but everything remains white. Then I'll hold Control, click on the channel thumbnail, go back into RGB, then layers, and we'll do basically the same thing we did a moment ago. Create a new layer and fill it with white. White is my foreground color, so I'll press Alt and Backspace. That's Option Delete on the Mac. And I can just place this layer into position, and now it seems like there are these musical notes rotating out of the brain, which is exactly what we want. And I'll do the same thing. I'll select Vivid Light and reduce the fill opacity just to get something similar to what I had before. And this is looking pretty good. I'm still not sure if we're gonna keep the light here in the background. Sometimes I look at it and I like it. Other times I look at it and I don't. So we're gonna have to figure that out. But for now, this is looking really, really good. And you probably guessed that we're gonna do that one more time by selecting this math formula and just placing it here. And what I'll do now is I'll just use a different technique just to show you guys something completely different that hopefully helps you in your creative project. So what I'll do is I'll start by going into Edit and selecting Perspective Warp, and I'll just create one grid here, and I'll create another one on the other side, and they should snap into place. Then I'll click on the Warp button, and I'll just warp this out. Make it seem like it's coming out of that brain there, like so. And I'll do the same thing on the other side, just so that it's not flat. And there you go. We're creating the illusion of perspective. And click on the check mark to commit the changes. This time I'll change the blending mode to color dodge. Color dodge will hide black, but keep the white and still create a similar illusion to what Vivid Light was doing in terms of interacting with the background and taking that color. See how this area here is taking the blue and this area here is taking the yellow. And of course, you can create a layer mask and paint with black on areas where you want to conceal the effect. At this point, I recommend that you do is press Ctrl-Alt-Shift-E to create a merge layer and just call it Final and convert it into a smart object. Then go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and from here, apply some effects. For example, you can apply contrast, increase the texture and the clarity to make the image pop. You can also increase the vibrance if you wish. And under Effects, you can increase the grain and the vignetting and press OK when you're done. Now, this is going to be basically the first version of the final image. And at this point, what I like to do is just make adjustments to the image. I know that more or less it's going to be my final result, so I can come back and make adjustments. For example, one of the things that I think I should adjust is that this layer is just too strong. I can reduce the fill so it's not so strong. I can also go into this layer here, which is the musical notes, and I'll call it that, musical notes. You got to make sure you stay organized. Delete this layer, and now continue adjusting the other ones as well. I think that my original design just had way too much going on, so I need to bring down some of these things. Then I can select the topmost layer, Control A to select all, Control Shift C to copy, merge all, and then open up the smart object by double clicking on it and then pasting. So notice the difference. We've made an adjustment and now we have a difference. Then I can close the smart object, save it, and my camera raw adjustments are applied to the image. If you need to adjust the camera raw adjustments, just double click on the label and make your adjustments. In this case, I think my contrast was a little heavy-handed, so I can adjust that. Maybe reduce the highlights a little bit, open up the shadows. You can decide what's best for your image and press OK when you update the result with the camera raw. One of the things that I'm still not sure if I like is this bright light here. Let me just select these items and I'll put them into a group, and I'll just call this group overlays. All my overlays are in this group. The brain is in this group. And now I have to decide whether I want to keep this or not. If I decide to get rid of it, I have to think about how I'm going to remove it from this photo. There's a lot of ways of doing that in Photoshop. One of the easiest ways is probably to duplicate the background by pressing Ctrl J and then pressing Ctrl T to transform, flip the layer horizontally, and then commit the changes. Hold Alt and Windows, Option on the Mac, and click on the layer mask icon and simply paint with white on areas where you want to reveal the background we duplicated, and then that will help us hide the light like so. And this looks pretty good. And then I can now disable the other layers, press Ctrl A to select all, Ctrl Shift C to copy, merge all, and then open up the smart object by double clicking on it and then pasting. Save, and then go back into my working document and you can see the results. So it's totally up to you whether you hide or reveal that light. In this case, I'll leave it off for now. And this is my final result after adding a few extra details. Remember to check out the link below to find out all the official information regarding this competition. I look forward to seeing what you create.